Good day, spiritual artists. This is CJ Miller, your host of the Spiritual Artist Podcast. And we are doing a Doodle Book month here, and I'm reading through my book, The Spiritual Artist. We are designed to create. It's on Amazon. You can purchase a copy if you'd like. Let's jump right in. Quote, don't dwell on what went wrong. Instead, focus on what to do next. Spend your energies on moving forward toward finding the answer. Dennis Waitley, end quote. Chapter 18 is called Focus on What's Working. And I love this chapter. It is pivotal in how to deal with approaching a painting as well as life. So here goes. Focus on what's working. After managing a small advertising agency for more than 20 years, I certainly garnered my share of learning opportunities. Working with various personalities on many creative projects, I got the chance to watch the human condition up close and personal. How do people interact with each other? How do we set goals and ensure a successful marketing campaign? How do we best co-create on a project as a team? I noticed a behavioral trait in some of my employees and my customers, which was affecting the success of our projects. After some focus groups with the team, I isolated a limiting behavior that was impeding our efforts. I noticed that when a project was released to the lead graphic designer, there were two types of responses. The first type of employee would receive the submitted material, look for missing content or vague directions, and then stop. When I approached them to monitor their progress, they would immediately point out what was stopping it and complain. But there was a second type of personality in our office, and they responded differently to the very same challenge. This employee would review all the submitted material, immediately begin organizing what could be completed, and process the work that could be done with the knowledge that they had at hand. They would continue with their behavior until they completed absolutely everything before returning to me. If, after they finished all that they could and hit a wall, they would present an action item list of incomplete items. Why such different responses from my creative staff? It seemed that there are two different learned behaviors when responding to a new situation or challenge. Some of my employees focused on the opportunities, while others concentrated on the limitations. After discussing this with my team, we decided to create a slogan that emphasized the behavioral trait that we preferred to see modeled. Our new tagline was, quote, "We see windows, not walls." This tagline underscored the concept that we look for possibilities rather than limitations. As spiritual artists, we should seek possible solutions rather than let walls stop us. This characteristic, whether innate or learned, impacted whether creative expression continued to expand or simply stop. Regardless, we can learn new behavior that leads to better results. When a spiritual artist knows to step back from their thought process and watch their actions, they have the opportunity to adjust their behavioral patterns and get better results. Our goal is one of creative expansion and new potentialities. It wasn't until years later, as I stood before a canvas, that I also had the bad habit of seeing limitations rather than possibilities. Like many foundling abstract artists, I would begin my work by throwing down layer after layer of color. Sometimes the composition would accidentally fall into place, sometimes it would not. Often I would grow frustrated by my results and leave the studio. But as I began watching my behavior from my spiritual perspective, I noticed what steps I took as I painted. The difference became apparent. When I looked for the segment of the painting with the most promise and expanded it, I kept moving ahead. I was focusing on the windows. I noticed that by focusing on what works and building on it, I could discover unique compositions and techniques. I began to practice this process. I would throw down color on the canvas with loose abandon. Then I would step back and notice which areas of the painting were already working. Perhaps two colors combined to create an exciting blend in the upper right corner. Or maybe some blurred line work overlaid with a slightly opaque soft color revealed an exciting new texture. I would expand that area that was working. Perhaps I could add more of that line work throughout the painting, or introduce that excellent color blending combination in another location on the canvas. As I worked, expanding the areas of success, the unwanted areas faded away. I realized that this was truly a spiritual practice. As spiritual artists, when we focus on what is working, we suddenly find that creative intelligence is working by our side and naturally leading us to the next step. We are co creating with the divine. When we focus on what is working, all the power of the universe is behind our efforts. I'm going to repeat that. When we focus on what is working, all the power of the universe is behind our efforts. Creative intelligence is constantly seeking sources of expansion. As the successful areas continue to expand, the unwanted elements of our painting begins to fade away. Whether you're identifying windows instead of walls or focusing on what is working and making it bigger, you are practicing spiritual artistry. Try this behavior change next time you stand before the easel, or better yet, try it next time you approach a challenge in your life situation. Focus on what's working within the context of that challenge. Don't focus on the challenge. Focus on the opportunity. Learn to expand what is working in your life. As I said, this is an incredible chapter because it teaches you a behavior, a new behavior that you can teach yourself and follow to start seeing the opportunities. And when you paint, I do ask you, and in my class, when I do a retreat, I teach my artists to look for the area on their canvas that's working. And I want to point out something that's very, very interesting. If I had the same exact start of a painting and I show it to 3 different students, they are all going to see a different area of that painting to expand. Isn't that interesting? They're all going to notice what's working in a different arena. That is where your unique creative DNA comes into the picture. There is not a one answer. There is not a one answer. So if you're in class and you show your painting to someone else and say, "What do you think?" You're actually pulling the focus away from who you are, because they're going to take the next step that is right for them. I want you to learn how to take the next step that is right for you. Now, as a beginner artist, it's always good to get other ideas and see what people want to do, what they would recommend, because that might get you to see that there's opportunities there. But ultimately, you are the decider. Did you hear that? Ultimately, you decide the next move. And that's why every painting is totally unique to the artist, because it's an expression of you co-creating with this creative intelligence that so much wants to create, wants to expand, and wants to be present. Now, I want to share something that happened the other day. Yesterday, I was interviewed on a podcast, a wonderfully sweet woman, and she interviewed me. And when she set up, suddenly the sound control that she was using, the product she was using, it kept having glitches, and the screen kept freezing while we were talking. And my initial instinct to say, let's reschedule, because it kept stopping and freezing in mid-sentence when she was talking, and then we had to wait. And then it froze and we had to wait. But you know what's really interesting? I decided to just let it go and focus on what's working. And what was working is that this woman had done her work. She had read my book. She was incredibly knowledgeable about what I was trying to communicate. And every time she asked me a question, I just waited. If the screen froze, I waited until it restarted and we spoke. Well, she sent that interview to me today, and I just re-listened to it this morning. I used it as my spiritual practice to listen to this podcast called on moveyourheartministries.com and listen to her interview while I started working on my painting today. And you know what? It's an incredible interview. I'm going to put the address in the description of this YouTube or on one of the Spotify channels so you can look it up. But it's moveyourheartministries.com. And Valerie Brown is my interviewer, and she's delightful. It's a great conversation. I encourage you to listen to it. It's a little bonus track. But I want to thank you for doodling and listening to this conversation. And as we end, I want you to think about your life right now. I want you to think about your life right now. Are you focusing on something that's not working? Are you obsessed right this moment about something that doesn't feel right? Just stop, set it down, and shift and look around you or look at your life. And I want you to start thinking about what is working in your life right now. What is working in your life right now? And focus on it, make it bigger. For example, did you just have a disagreement or an argument with your spouse? But then yesterday you had a wonderful lunch with a friend? Call your friend up. Call her and bring that niceness, that love, that expression, more of it. Get more of it in your life. Don't worry about the argument with your husband. Does that make sense? I'm not telling you to fix your husband. I'm not telling you to try to resolve it. I'm not telling you to replay over and over again the conversation that you had. I'm telling you to look elsewhere, to turn the other cheek and look at the good. Thank you for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This has been a delightful, delightful experience for me doing this. It's reminding me of all my key messages. I hope you're enjoying it. And I will see you tomorrow when everything the rest of the day works out in perfect harmony. Thank you. Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.